Hi, everyone. We've set up this Being an Engineer podcast as an industry knowledge repository, if you will. We hope it'll be a tool where engineers can learn about and connect with other companies, technologies, people, resources, and opportunities. So make some connections and enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Being an Engineer podcast. Our guest today is Axel Krieger, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the Johns Hopkins University, where he leads a team of students, scientists, and engineers in the research and development of robotic tools and laparoscopic devices. A few of the projects he has led include the development of a surgical robot called the Smart Tissue Autonomous Robot, or STAR for short, and using 3D printing for surgical planning and patient-specific implants. Axel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, well, let's get started with the same question I ask everyone in the beginning. What made you decide to become an engineer?
Fantastic question. For me, it was really, an affinity to math and physics and science classes in school. I grew up in Germany, and there in the last 2 years in high school, you can really specialize in different courses and different classes. And I absolutely picked those sciencey courses and realized that's really my passion and interest. My dad was also an engineer, so that really helped, clarify the picture for me a bit. And that's when I then, chose to become an engineer.
Neat. And how long have you been in the U.S.?
I first came to the U.S. For an internship back right at 2000. I was studying in Germany and did an internship with a German automotive company in South Carolina. And that's where I met an awesome girlfriend, and who is now my wife.
Congratulations!
Really, good incentive to stay in the U.S. So I went back, finished my degree, but we continued dating, and then I came back for doing research and for my PhD.
Cool. Do you travel back to Germany very often?
Definitely, yeah. Go. Once or twice a year, and sometimes bring the family now.
Have you noticed at all if engineering in Germany is much different than engineering here in the States?
Definitely in Germany, I had the feeling that it was very automotive focused. That's such a big component of the industry there. And so, studies were a lot about automotive work. And so, I think a different focus here a bit, I feel.
Yeah, that could be. All right. Well, let's see. Let's jump into the meat and potatoes here. You helped develop the STAR robot, the Smart Tissue Autonomous Robot. And there was even a study recently published in Science Robotics. Can you tell us a little bit about what is the STAR robot and how does it work?
Fantastic. We developed the Smart Tissue Autonomous Robot for doing precision surgery. And recently we demonstrated the first autonomous keyhole surgery. The actual surgery is called an anastomosis. So that's reconnection of a tubular structure. So that's the clinical term, anastomosis. So we're working on bowel tissue. So imagine you have colon cancer surgery, for example. You take out the diseased tissue, and then you need to reconnect it together. And that is done with sutures. It takes, really precision placement of about 20 sutures to create a leak-free reconnection. It's a very critical, very difficult step of so many surgeries. And so that's what we've been focusing on. And in this recent study, we were demonstrating autonomous, suturing of bowel tissue, and not just with open surgery, so full access, but with keyhole surgery. So small tools, small cameras going into the body and doing that internally.
That's amazing. You mentioned joining two cylinders. So we're basically connecting like an artery or something like that to two tubes.
Exactly. Two tubes. So anastomosis, the general term for any reconnection of tubular structures. And in this instant, we've been working on bowel, so intestinal tissue. So two halves of an intestine, they're connected end to end. So, if you dissect them in the middle, take out tumor, a section of the bowel with tumor, for example, then you reconnect the healthy ends together end to end.
I see. That is really interesting. What does the interface look like when the two ends, the free ends of those tubes are joined? Is it like they're each kind of flanged out and butt welded before they're sutured across that flange diameter? Or is it like one of the tubes, you kind of squeeze it so the diameter is a little smaller and then you tuck it into the ID of the adjacent tube and then you kind of stitch circumferentially? What does that interface look like?
Yeah, a little bit of the former. That kind of naturally happens. So you place a suture into both sides and then pull it together, and the tissue deforms a little bit and butts against each other. So you get kind of like you have like 20 sutures there. So you get kind of a wavy pattern. And sometimes the tissue goes a little bit to the outside. That's better than going to the inside because then you reduce the, diameter. So then, bowel, stool could kind of like,
I see.
Get blocked. So you want it to kind of go to the outside, and we call that to evert the tissue to go to the outside. So it becomes a bit of a wavy, a pattern, where you have tension on the sutures and then no tension in between, but you need to have it closed enough so you don't get any of the leakage to the outside, which cause, of course, huge potential issues.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So about 20 sutures or stitches to get it closed, leak proof, sealed. And these vessels are, I don't know, maybe 3-4 millimeters in diameter, something like that?
They're a bit larger than that. The small bowel is maybe around 10 millimeters, something like 10, 12 millimeters in size.
Got it. Okay. I read this article about the STAR robot and this laparoscopic surgery that I guess your team or a team of surgeons had completed, not a team of surgeons, the robot had completed autonomously on a pig, and it was apparently very successful. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So in this study, we first compared our performance of our STAR robot to expert surgeons on phantom tissue. So phantom tissue means like just kind of silicone, plastic, tissue. Yeah. And we did a comparison study with expert surgeons and then also surgeons using the current state of the art in medical robotics, which is a Vinci Robot. That's the type of robot where every motion of the robot is performed on a console. So there's no autonomy. It's basically, an extension of the human hands. And so we compared our autonomous robot to the current state of the art Vinci Robot and to manual surgery. And there we showed that with our technology, with camera and, control and suturing tool together, we can improve the consistency of the sutures. So the spacing is more even, and we make fewer mistakes. In manual surgery, what happens a lot is you surgeon would place a needle inside, then not like where it ended up, pull it back out, So that causes, of course, some injury, and we can really avoid that with our robotic technology, and we can make it more precise, and so reduce the risk of complications and leakage.
How does the robot know where to hold the bowel or the intestines, and how to suture and how to distinguish one tissue from another tissue?
So the robot gets some help initially from the surgeon to kind of set up the tissue. So kind of, prepare the two ends. And this is also done in manual surgery. There's something called stay sutures. So a suture that kind of holds the end open. And for our robot, we placed these near-infrared markers on the tissue corners. So that is just with a syringe, a little blob of near-infrared dye. And the robot has a near-infrared camera, detects those corners really robustly. It's also nice that it's immune to blood or other occlusion, so it shines really brightly, and that allows us to first do a suture plan. So we see the corners, then we of course can with a 3D camera we can measure the distance on the surface of the tissue. We can divide that evenly to get really nice even spacing. So create plans for the surgeons, and we provided a couple plans to the surgeons with different spacings, different distribution of the sutures. Surgeon would say, okay, this one I like the best, approve that. And then the robot would go in and place one suture after another, and use those markers also to make adjustments, to react to deformation, to direct to motion, also to detect the breathing cycle. So we had to, synchronize the motion of the robot with the breathing of the patient to be precise and really enter the, each suture at the right spot.
I see. Okay, so let me see if I got the process down here. A surgeon will probably make the incision. Is there a trocar that's used?
Exactly. So there are these little ports, trocars that are placed. Absolutely. So we used, 4 of these trocars. 2 were used for the robot, and then 2 were used for, cameras and just, looking at the surgery.
Got it. Okay, so the surgeon creates a small incision, places the trocars, inserts the robotic arm through the trocar, kind of stages the vessels, and then applies a marker on each of the free ends of the bowel, and then at that point it's up to the robot, and it's fully autonomous at that point.
We call this the process supervised autonomy. So we don't want to have kind of replace the surgeon. So we instead of having the surgeon do every step of the surgery, just kind of watch the robot and then intervene if something happens and could improve something. So we have a high degree of autonomy. 83% of the times we didn't need any help from the surgeons, but every now and then, especially at really difficult to place sutures at the corners, we needed a bit of an assistance. So it's not fully autonomous; it's supervised autonomous.
Got it. Okay. It reminds me of a lot of the autonomous vehicles out on the road right now, that like Waymo or something, where there's someone in the driver's seat that can take over if needed, but otherwise the vehicle's doing all the driving.
Absolutely. I think that's a great analogy. And for us, maybe it's a little bit like a park assist or so, because some portions are really still done manually, right? But then the anastomosis step is done, in very high degree of autonomy.
Cool. That's very neat. Okay. The 3D machine vision that you mentioned, the cameras that are kind of watching and providing feedback to the robot, was this like an off-the-shelf vision system, like a Cognex thing or a Keyence thing or something? Or did you guys have to kind of build your own vision system to work with the robot?
Yeah, we had to build our own vision system. There are really great 3D cameras for open surgery, so large cameras, So when we started this project initially, we used a commercial light field camera from a company Robotics in Germany. But with the newest work, we needed to do a keyhole surgery. So we need a small little endoscope that goes in and gets really good, precise 3D vision. And there's nothing on the market. So there we actually, teamed with an optics professor here at Johns Hopkins, Jin Kang, and his students, and built a custom structured light 3D camera. So it sends out these fringe patterns of lines onto the surgical scene, has a CCD camera to detect the reflection of that on the tissue, and calculate a 3D point cloud of the target scene.
Huh. How long does the procedure take versus if it was done purely manually by a surgeon? I mean, at least that portion of it that's being done by the robot, is it about the same, or is one faster than the other?
We were about the same as manual surgery. So I think we wanted to be really safe and, make sure we don't make any mistakes, make it easy for the operating surgeon to supervise. So we didn't run the robot at kind of full speed capacity. We can go much faster, but in this study, we were slightly slower than the surgeon doing this manually.
Got it. So about the same speed, but you're getting superior results.
That's right. And I think this is something we could easily speed up in future studies. We just wanted to do a really nice, demonstration of this and did not optimize for speed.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. What led to the development of the STAR robot? Where did you guys start? What was the impetus?
In discussions with surgeons, going over the current state of the art, what medical robots exist there. And we thought, that robotics and autonomous robotics could really help in getting a more consistent result every time. The idea there is that you can kind of democratize the access to the best results to everybody, so it doesn't matter which hospital you go to, who's your operating surgeon, how many thousands of procedures has that surgeon done, was it brand new from medical school, like that. That's the idea, to get really always the same results. So in discussions with surgeons, we thought this was really needed and would bring the whole field forward.
Nice. So you mentioned the Vinci Robot a little while ago, and we've actually had someone else on the show, Alison Peck, who worked on the development of the Vinci Robot, or at least one of the Vinci robots. Is the STAR robot very different from Vinci, or are there overlapping areas, or are they just, very, very separate machines used for very different purposes?
Yeah, the Da Vinci is really a groundbreaking, medical robot. It's widely used, for different surgeries. For example, prostatectomy, taking out the prostate, is now done like 90% of the time with a robot. So, really fantastic work. Some aspects of the camera are the same. Some aspects of the tool are exactly the same, of the robot, mechanical architecture. The paradigm is just very different, where, the Da Vinci robot relies 100% on the operating surgeon to, execute every motion of the robot. So it's really an extension of the robot's hands. That's how it's, conceived. That's how it's, regulated. That's how it's, is kind of the business model of it. And for us, we thought we want to, create the next generation of surgical robots, where you have, like a self-driving car, like more autonomy, and then potentially, more precision and more consistency and better results.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the Da Vinci is always driven by a surgeon, whereas the STAR, at least in the area in which it operates, it's fully autonomous. You push a button and it goes ahead and does its thing.
You got it. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to take just a short break here and share with the listeners that teampipeline.us is where they can learn more about how we help medical device and other product engineering or manufacturing teams develop turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines to characterize, inspect, assemble, manufacture, and perform verification testing on your devices. And today we're speaking with Axel Krieger. Axel, another thought I had as I was preparing for this interview was, do you foresee a future in which robots are doing all of our surgeries? Or do you think that there's always going to be a need for, human-based manual procedures?
I think in the foreseeable future, there's really no desire or, need to replace the surgeon, I don't think that's the goal. Also, consider, surgeons go to so many years of very, very specialized training, are amazing at their job. And there's, so much patient to patient variation and, decisions that you need to make. It's really hard to imagine that all of these could be done, really, really well by a robotic system. I think there is a potential for more autonomy and, doing procedures in settings where there are no surgeons currently. So imagine like in a trauma scenario, built into a emergency vehicle, and you do a quick life-saving care that is not a full surgery, but a small procedure like placing a catheter for stopping an internal bleed, something like that, like a step down in difficulty, something that, you could do where you don't compete against, surgeons, but do it in settings where there are currently no surgeons and no good options.
Okay, interesting. All right. Can patients today? I know the STAR robot is still, I guess, in R&D stages or still development stages, I think. But can patients today elect to have their surgeries performed by a robot like the STAR robot, or how does one even go about determining if that's an option?
Yes, definitely. So a lot of surgeries are done with robots like the Da Vinci in the teleoperated fashion. So it really depends on what kind of surgery it is. If you think about prostate surgery, hysterectomy, these are done predominantly already today with a robot. I think if you look even at the websites of different urology, centers, they advertise, the robots there. So you can really see what kind of technology the different centers have. And it's, really nice. Our STAR robot is in preclinical studies right now. So we demonstrated the first use in animals, but we are still a few years away of doing a first in human study.
Okay. So potentially 2, 3, 4 years from now, a patient might be able to opt to have a surgery performed by the STAR robot.
Yeah, we are working on transitioning this and preparing the first in human studies. So that would be the next step for us.
Cool. And this is fully developed by Johns Hopkins?
Yes. So the origin of the STAR robot comes from Children's National Hospital. That's where I was, before coming to Hopkins. So that's where we started. Then I was at University of Maryland, so did the academic work there, and for the last 2 years at Johns Hopkins.
How does that work? This might be, outside of what you focus on, but I'm curious. How does a medical device like the STAR robot work commercially? If it's developed by Johns Hopkins, or maybe a variety of different clinical entities, hospital entities, would they just start licensing it out to different facilities for use, or does that IP get transferred entirely to some sister company that then manufactures it and handles the business end of all of that? Because Johns Hopkins is, at the end of the day, a hospital, right? Not necessarily a medical device manufacturer.
Yeah, great question. Johns Hopkins has great hospital, but then also fantastic engineering school. That's where I am, and university. We definitely realized that we don't want to just do academic work and really value translational aspects of our research. And so we have a large, team that helps us with transfer of technology. And that can go a couple of routes, either licensing technology or, doing startups. A lot of faculty, have startups, work with students, and so there are different routes. The STAR patents, the initial patents from Children's are licensed to a small company, Active Surgical. And there are some other patents after that.
Okay, neat. And how did you get into the hospital system? A lot of medical device engineers, they'll go off and work for a medical device manufacturer like BD or Medtronic or Stryker. How did you end up at Johns Hopkins?
That was a little bit of a route for me. So I actually, studied in Germany, then came to the US, and my wife started medical school. So that really got me into the medical field more. And I looked for, research areas, in robotics, and then found Johns Hopkins in the medical robotics setting. And after doing my PhD, I commercialized my PhD work with a small company in Toronto in Canada. And after doing that for a few years, I really realized I'm not built for, just working in a company selling equipment. I'm super excited about the early research, the conceptual phase. And that's what drove me back to academia. And that route has then, taken me to Children's National, and then as a, tenure track faculty, first at Maryland and now at Johns Hopkins.
Wonderful. Okay. And what are some pros and cons of medical device engineering over some other industries in the engineering field?
I find the reward amazing to do, like helping patients, helping people. I for my PhD work, we did a robot for prostate surgery, and I remember having lunch with a patient where my robot was used, and that was such an amazing experience. So I think that is so much cooler than in other fields, right? So if you know you can help somebody, and that's incredible. Also working, with patients, doctors, the whole healthcare aspect is so fascinating and rich. And also really interesting problems. So as a scientist and engineer, really an exciting area to work in.
Well said. I'm imagining right now, like as an engineer, if I designed a cell phone case for someone and I saw them walking around with this cell phone case on their iPhone, I would probably think, oh, that's cool. That's what I designed, and that would be neat. But to sit down with a patient who has had a operation performed on them with a device that you helped design and know that you have substantially increased their standard of living, medically speaking, what an amazing feeling that must be.
You said it exactly. Yeah, that's the best feeling you can have as an engineer, I think.
Yeah. That's great. Well, what was you've talked about it a little bit already, but the path to becoming a medical device engineer, is it more or less the same as getting into any other engineering field, or are there any specific steps that you recommend engineers take to get into medical devices?
Yeah, there are certainly several routes. For me specifically, in the area of medical robotics, robotics in itself is already very multidisciplinary. So different fields, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, computer science, and then of course on the more biomedical side, biomedical engineering. So all different routes could lead, to becoming a medical roboticist. So, I think, just different ways to get there and different ways to specialize. Fantastic field.
And I guess it doesn't hurt if you marry a physician, right?
Yes. Something definitely to emulate.
All right. Well, that's great. Axel, how can people get a hold of you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Axel Krieger, and then also if you want to Google our lab at Johns Hopkins, it's the Immerse Lab. There's contact information, and I'm happy to get in touch.
Terrific. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been fascinating learning more about the STARS robot and what your team is working on. Really, really cool stuff. It's almost the stuff of science fiction. In fact, I read a book a little while ago called Project Hail Mary. You haven't heard of that book, have you?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. It was written by, I can't remember the author's name. It was written by the same author who wrote The Martian. And it's about this guy who goes into outer space to save the world, basically. And there's basically a robotic doctor there, but it's like a 6-axis robot kind of thing, And as I was reading about the STARS robot, I was like, oh, that sounds just like the robot in this Project Hail Mary book. Anyway, it feels like science fiction, I guess is my point. It was very, very cool. So
thank you so much.
Thank you again so much for spending some time and sharing about your background and experience and about the advances in medical robotics.
Yeah, thanks for your interest. It was great chatting with you.
I'm Aaron Monker, founder of Pipeline Design and Engineering. If you liked what you heard today, please share the episode. To learn how your team can leverage our team's expertise developing turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines, and with product design, visit us at teampipeline.us. Thanks for listening.